DA was Combs' enterprise. So again, linking that enterprise to it. When we're dealing with the witness tampering, I don't think it was as strong. You're dealing with D-Rock and the messages to Mia. I don't think it was that strong. Also dealing with Jane and the recording that KK recorded Sean Combs and Jane having that conversation. The forced labor, I think it was probably one of the weakest counts, dealing with the predicate acts. And again, that's dealing with Mia and the long hours that they work, but also having put Cassie working as a sex slave pretty much. When you're dealing with the drug distribution, I thought that was the strongest count of the predicate acts, having to deal with racketeering conspiracy, because we know the common thread that narcotics was given to Cassie and to Jane on more than one occasion, and all you have to prove is one incident within the possession with intent to distribute. You have the personal assistant saying that they were asked also to bring narcotics to give it to Sean Combs so it can be delivered during the freak-offs. And even Brendan Paul even said that on one occasion, Sean Combs had him try out some narcotics, and just giving him the narcotics to try out is sufficient to meet that count.
Rena, what can you tell us about the reaction in the courtroom?
Well, Diane, we know that it has been very tense in that courtroom. It has been emotional. Combs yesterday, when there was a partial verdict, we saw him wiping tears from his eyes. He was slumped over in his chair. He was hugging his attorneys. Just a short time ago, a couple of minutes ago, we saw his family arrive back at the courthouse here. They have been here really every single day of this trial. Now, we are told that Combs was in the courtroom this morning for about 30 minutes. He was mostly reading a book, jotting down notes, and he spent most of the deliberations in a separate location. We are told, though, that everyone is making their way back to the courtroom. Lawyers from both sides, prosecutors are filling the front row of the courtroom. The judge and the jury are not inside at this point. Before this morning, though, Combs shared a moment with his family. He bowed his head. He led them in prayer. He said, "Bless this jury, bless my family." He told them to stay strong. They locked hands and they prayed. And he also hugged his defense attorney, Brian Steele, before heading to that separate location where he has been for most of these deliberations. So this is clearly a big moment. He's about to learn his fate that these 12 New Yorkers have decided for him.
Bernardo, one of the things the jury asked for in one of their several notes was to look again at Cassie's testimony about that 2016 hotel attack. That was the video of the attack was caught on surveillance of Sean Combs assaulting her, kicking her, dragging her through a hallway. And they were asking to see the testimony where she testified that she had was trying to escape one of those freak-offs when he beat her and dragged her back into that hotel room. Do you read the tea leaves there, or what does that tell you in general, that they wanted to see that testimony again? And how critical do you think that event and that video was in this case?
Let's be clear, Diane, but for that Intercontinental video, we wouldn't be here today. I can honestly say, having been a prosecutor for 16
I have to interrupt
years.
you. We're going to a special report with the network. Let's listen to Kira Phillips.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air because the jury has now reached a full verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. Jurors had the court scrambling yesterday, you may remember, when they sent a note to the judge saying they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, but they were stuck on the remaining racketeering conspiracy charge. The judge telling them to keep an open mind. Well, deliberation resumed this morning for a third day. The Combs trial has been going on for nearly 2 months. As you know, graphic testimony, disturbing sexually explicit images. And during yesterday's deliberations, the jury asked for a transcript of ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura's testimony about the 2016 hotel attack that you're seeing here on your screen that was captured on surveillance video in that hotel. That video showing Combs kicking and dragging Cassie in a hallway. Cassie testified she was trying to escape one of those so-called freak-offs when Combs beat her and dragged her back into the room. The jury made up of 8 men and 4 women. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky. He is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, I understand now that Sean Combs has entered the courtroom.
Every day, the Sean Combs is now seated at the defense table, Kira, with his attorneys. Judge Arun Subramanian has just taken the bench, instructing everyone in the courtroom to maintain decorum when the verdict is reached. It comes after about 14 hours of deliberations over 3 days, and it comes after the jury became stuck on the top charge of racketeering conspiracy, saying they had reached a unanimous verdict on 4 of 5 counts, sex trafficking and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, but had become stuck when it came to the racketeering conspiracy charge. And it's a complicated charge because it required the jury to believe that Combs, if they were to convict, was the leader of a criminal enterprise who relied on his assistants and bodyguards and other employees to commit crimes with him. And there were 8 to choose from. The jury would have to find that Combs agreed to commit at least 2 of those 8 so-called predicate acts. But the judge at the time did not take a partial verdict. He instructed the jury to go back at it. It was too soon to give up. And here now, on the 3rd day of deliberations, after about 14 hours, Kira, the jury has reached a verdict.
And Aaron, I understand that, as I'm being told now, the jury is entering the courtroom. Give us a little bit of color from early this morning. Apparently, Sean Combs was allowed a moment with his family. They prayed together. Tell us about that, Aaron.
This was not the first time that Sean Combs has prayed in the courtroom. The judge was not on the bench. He asked the marshals for permission to speak with his family. There's an entire row in the gallery, the second row of the gallery, reserved for Combs' family members, his mother, twin daughters and sons, all there, other family members in the courtroom as well. And he asked them to hold hands, bow their heads, and pray. And that's when Sean Combs asked for blessings for his family and also for the jury. That jury is now entering the courtroom, Kira.
And I'm told the jury is seated now. Brian Buckmeyer, our legal contributor, I want to bring you in on this. I'm going to have you comment on that in just a second. But let's talk about the RICO charge, the toughest charge here, but would bring the strongest penalty, right?
In a sense, yes. So with the racketeering conspiracy, it does have a possibility of a life sentence. The reason why I say in a sense is because the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, that sentencing guideline has a minimum of 15 years to life. So life is a possibility whether or not RICO is met. But I think with the RICO, there's an added issue as well as to automatic forfeiture, because when you are convicted of a RICO conspiracy, the government isn't just looking to incarcerate an individual who participates or, in this case, is allegedly head of that racketeering conspiracy, but also to dismantle that conspiracy or that RICO from a financial standpoint. So all the stuff we heard about Sean Combs' homes and his enterprise and the bank accounts that were used for the sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, if convicted of racketeering conspiracy, that can also be dismantled or taken by the federal government.
And Brian, talk about some of the charges that were dropped. Is it being read right now? Okay, let's go right into the courtroom. Okay, all right. It is being read right now, I am told. Aaron, let's take it back to you as we are now hearing from the judge inside the courtroom.
So the jury, Kira, had to fill out this form, which lists the charges, proven, not proven, the predicate crimes, and whether Sean Combs is not guilty or guilty. On count 1, the racketeering conspiracy charge, Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, perhaps the most complicated charge for the jury to understand. The count 1 had provided for a number of predicate acts, but the jury does not have to get into that because they have found Sean Combs not guilty of leading a criminal enterprise, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy. They will now move to the other 4 counts, 2 of them on sex trafficking and on and we have not guilty now on count 2, which was sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking when it comes to his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. There was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last 2 months about consent and coercion and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one. And the jury decided it was not criminal sex trafficking when Sean Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse, as you saw in that video. He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He has been found guilty on count 3, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. He has also been found guilty on count 5, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison, so we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking Cassandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And we're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking of Jane. And just now the jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty of sex trafficking his former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym Jane. So the jury has now believed that the relationships that Sean Combs had with his former girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane, were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been convicted of here is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And Kira, those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony from the male escorts. The jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking. Kira?
All right, let's put this in perspective now that we know where Sean Combs has been found guilty and non-guilty. Let's put it into perspective, Brian, on time he will serve. What are we looking at now with regard to years? Of course, we should point out there will be an appeal. He's got plenty of money to do that. But let's take it from where it stands right now.
Kira, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure if I would say there would be an appeal, because for Sean Combs and his defense team, this is a massive win. 3 of the counts that had a life sentence possibility are gone. When it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution, the minimum is nothing. There's a theoretical possibility that he walks out on probation. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but the max is 10 years. Even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years, they're going to look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years possible through that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, well under 10 years possibly, that is a victory. Will he appeal? Sure, that's his right to do so, but I don't see an appeal here. I think you take this as a win, you serve the few years that you may get, and you be happy that you didn't get life. I'm somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the Jane trafficking. But this is, I think in only so many words, and I keep saying it, I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
I'm being told now Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment. Clearly, he's seeing it as you are seeing it as well. You know, we should point out, Brian, let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around himself. He was a big part of bringing hip hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs? How will it impact his business empire?
I think, for lack of a better term, there was always going to be a blemish on Sean Combs' career. I think people are going to look at this in 2 different ways. In one way, they're going to say that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from underneath it. They're going to look at past events through both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gone away with bad charges, especially looking at that Intercontinental video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers. All of the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise. They did not see the force, fraud, and coercion. And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw, as to like, okay, so he paid for people to go across state lines to have consensual sex. And I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out. And so do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
But let's put it into the context, Aaron Katursky, of the Me Too movement. I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video that we saw over and over again in that hotel hallway of Sean Combs barely naked in a towel, kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura.
It's an unforgettable piece of video, and it was one of the most visceral pieces of evidence that the jury saw during the course of a nearly 2-month trial, Kira. And the defense really admitted what's depicted on it is domestic violence, but they said all along he's not charged with domestic violence. The defense insisted, even though the defense did not put on much of a case, called no witnesses, that what was depicted was not sex trafficking, and the jury seems to have agreed. And Sean Combs is clearly taking this outcome of a split verdict, guilty on only the transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges, as a win. The jury has been excused. As the 8 men and 4 women stood to leave their seats, Sean Combs made praying hands in their direction and bowed his head slightly as if to say thank you. When the outcome was read aloud in court, Combs put his hands in the air and looked to the ceiling, clearly taking this as a win that he was acquitted on the most serious charges he faced, Kira.
And now I understand, Aaron, his attorneys are calling for him to actually be released today. Could that happen?
Well, it could happen because he has already served about a year's time, a little shy of a year, and there will be a sentencing date. What the defense is likely arguing is that he is now no longer has anything to do with a violent crime. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, a minimum of nothing. So it will be up to the judge to decide. But where he is no longer accused of a violent crime, the defense may have a good case to get him released until he is formally sentenced. If that happens, it's possible he could walk right out the golden doors here. Certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members of his family were certainly elated. They were not allowed to show any emotion, but they are remaining in the courtroom to see what happens, what the judge ultimately decides, Kira.
Brian, your thoughts on the fact that he could be released today?
So at the beginning of this case, when Sean Combs was charged with sex trafficking, that is a charge that has the assumption that someone should be held pending prosecution. That assumption is gone now because he's been found not guilty of those 2 charges. And to piggyback off what Aaron is saying, the severity of his punishment has greatly decreased. He's no longer looking at life. He's looking at a max of 10 years on each count. Some of that time he's already served while waiting for this case. Mark Agnifilo, the defense attorney who's leading this case, has said that his private plane is in Maui. He has no access to it. So he's hinting at the idea of a number of things that a judge will consider when thinking about bail. Is this person a flight risk? How serious of a sentence are they looking at? And flight risk goes into 2 portions. The actual ability to fly and not come back to the jurisdiction, but also the likelihood of doing that. A person who's facing life, more likely to be a flight risk. A person who's just beaten 3 of the 5 top counts in a trial like this and is only facing 10 years, far less of a flight risk. And so while I think it's somewhat of a Hail Mary for him to be released today, this is the strongest possible outcome that he could have had to make this argument. And I think the defense has a leg to stand on in making this argument that Sean Combs should be released pending the sentence.
Let me ask you, Brian, because you and I were talking for days about the videos. The just how explicit they were, how Sean Combs treated these women, listening to Cassie Ventura break down on the stand, listening to other women, former girlfriends, talk about the way he treated women. I brought this question to Aaron, but I want to ask you as well, as someone who's an attorney, someone who has been in the courtroom for cases that involve domestic violence, knowing what we know about what happened and how he treated these women, and now looking at this outcome, how he's been acquitted on the most serious charges, your overall thoughts moving forward about what this says about the Me Too movement, the power of a music mogul when he has money, when he has fame. Your thoughts?
So my thoughts, I think, I try to go beyond just being an attorney, and I'll try to sidestep that and just talk as a man, as an adult. I think there can be no mixing of words as to what Sean Combs is when it comes to the treatment of women. Full stop, period. There's no question as to what we saw in terms of the strength of the women who took the stand and testified about the abuse that happened to them. There's no question about the photos we saw of Cassie in terms of the bruising of her body, the bruising of her face, and the violence in that Intercontinental Hotel. Full stop. There's no justification of that. There's no explanation of that. And I think in terms of the Me Too movement, there should be strength in the fact that those women were believed in terms of what they said. Putting my attorney hat back on for a moment, I think the difficulty of this and what may be perceived, and I hope it's a perception and not a reality, of the Me Too movement taking a step back based on this verdict, I think it comes from the overreaching of the government in this case, of trying to fit the allegations of this case into a RICO conspiracy, made it that much less palatable for the jury to take what they were saying to be true. And I think that might have also affected, in some way, shape, or form, the trafficking as well. I'll be honest, I'm somewhat shocked that they did not find Sean Combs guilty of trafficking Cassie because of the violence there. But I think that they made a mistake of not understanding the difference between a brutal domestic violence relationship in which Sean Combs participated in and was in many regards an aggressor of, if not the absolute aggressor of, and trafficking. And I think the overreach and misapplication of what 12 people in the Southern District of New York, or what society would believe to be trafficking in RICO, that misstep and misperception is what led the SDNY here. The SDNY has phenomenal prosecutors, has a phenomenal office, and their record speaks for itself. But I think in this case, they overestimated the strength of their case, and this is what happens when a jury speaks.
Aaron, outside court, tell us about who you're seeing. How big of a crowd is it? The sense of the support, if indeed he does walk out of those golden doors, as you said, the type of support he will receive.
Well, out here now, Kira, there are, of course, a number of reporters, a number of bloggers who have been following the trial, curious onlookers, tourists, those in the park across the street doing their morning workout. But everyone is certainly curious whether Sean Combs is going to walk out those golden doors released on bail. His defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told the judge a moment ago Combs would be willing to put up $1 million bail to assure that he shows up for his sentencing. Federal prosecutors just opposed his release on bail, saying that he has committed a litany of crimes and there's no reason to believe he would do anything different if he is released now. Federal prosecutors believe Sean Combs still represents a danger and a risk of flight from justice. They point to the physical violence, even though he was not found guilty of sex trafficking nor charged with any physical violence. They say he has shown a predilection to committing physical violence, as the defense readily admitted. So prosecutors are opposing his release on bail. The judge is going to take a moment to decide.
Brian, your thoughts. Is Sean Combs a risk?
So the question is, a risk of what, right? Would I want Sean Combs to be around any girlfriends or women right now? No, because I think the allegations and the facts have shown that he is a toxic individual who could be very violent towards women. But if you're asking me as to whether or not he's a risk to not come back to court to be sentenced, maybe it's my bias as a defense attorney, and looking at this verdict now, I do not believe he's a risk to not come back to court. I think if anything, he is elated, he is happy, he's excited to come back to court to formulate the best argument for sentencing. And yes, he might spend some years in prison, but the amount of time that he would spend is far less than if he fled and never came back. And he has children here. He has enterprises here. He has at least 60 civil lawsuits that he has to fight. He has, in my mind, and maybe I'm making too strong of an application as a defense attorney, he has far more reasons to stay here and fight now after this verdict than to flee and never come back. And so, do I think he's going to get released? Probably not. That's a high bar to overcome, and I don't think the judge will allow that. But I think there is a very valid and strong argument that he is not a flight risk, and I think there's a possibility, albeit very small, that he walks out of those golden doors.
And Aaron, from what I understand, the judge has now said he is going to take his time to consider if indeed Sean Combs will be released today or not.
He will give a decision today, Kira, but the government and defense attorneys are asking for a period of hours so they can write letters, make their arguments on both sides. So it could be quite a while before the judge decides whether Sean Combs deserves to be released on bail. The government is making the case that he still faces up to 20 years in prison after his conviction on the 2 transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges. But the jury has cleared him of the most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy that could have sent him to prison for life.
Brian, how do you think, what was it that defense lawyers did? What was it that they said? What was it that they had that you think helped deliver a victory for their client?
I think the case against Sean Combs was the first time, at least in me covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, where I was sitting in court, the R. Kelly trial, where I was sitting in court, and many of the cases that I think we would associate with the Me Too movement, where the defense was willing to say, my client is indefensible in some of his actions, that what he did and what you saw is wrong, but making the very strong distinction and walking the very tightrope of saying what he did wrong and what he's being accused of are 2 different things. What we've seen of people in the past of saying, well, they're all lying, you can't trust these women, you can't believe them. I think that's not a way to handle these cases. And I think what the defense did well is in talking to the human aspect of these are very messy relationships, that Sean Combs is an abuser. And Mark Ignifolos said it himself, if Sean Combs was accused of domestic violence, there would not be a trial because he would plead guilty. Do I think that's a bit of showmanship? Yes. Do I think that would actually be true? Maybe, maybe not. But I think arguing it nonetheless in front of a jury and admitting to some of the bad facts and trying to parse through it all, I think it gave them credibility to get to this verdict.
Let's bring in our Bernarda Villalona, who's been also with us as an attorney, as a contributor here at ABC News. You and I have been talking every day for months now about this case. Bernarda, I asked Brian this question as an attorney who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with this verdict because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution, into this investigation. And they also did a lot of comforting of trying to give strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're dealing that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had the key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story, and scared of what could happen once they came forward, because I'm sure with social media and people talking in the news that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done and that they are liars. But they, and they alone, know what happened to them. And they had prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
The judge said court is adjourned for now, Kira. He's going to give the parties until 1 p.m. Eastern time to submit letters arguing for or against his release on bail. The judge left the bench until later on this afternoon, when he'll give his decision. Once the judge was off the bench, Sean Combs was escorted out by the marshals. The judge told him he's going to have to cool his heels in the courthouse for a bit. But as he left the courtroom, there were applause from the gallery, some cheers in the gallery, where members of his family have been in steadfast vigil. His mother here most days, his twin daughters back, his sons have been here most days. They cheered for their father after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faces, still convicted of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And now we await the decision as to whether he's going to be released on bail. If he is, he will walk out to a crowd that includes people holding up Sean John T-shirts and other supporters who have been here saying, "Where's the Rico?" They've been shouting that into the street for weeks, and they would certainly welcome this verdict if he is to walk out those golden doors, Kira. For the jury, they really had to make a difficult decision, not just on the racketeering conspiracy, but as the defense said, the women that Combs was accused of trafficking were also his long-term girlfriends. Cassie Ventura with him for 11 years, Jane with him for more than 3 years. And the defense tried to argue that they were consensual relationships, that they were in it just as much as he was, because that was their lifestyle, even though they freely admitted the polyamorous swingers kink was not everybody's cup of tea. But he said these women were in it, and it required the jury to make distinctions between consent and coercion and love and control and free will. And in the end, they acquit on the most serious charges that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years, acquitting on sex trafficking in addition to the racketeering conspiracy, Kira.
Bernard, I want to bring you back in on that. As Aaron was saying, this really came down to violence and fear versus love, infidelity, and jealousy. We are watching the doors now to see if lawyers will be coming out and coming to the mics. But Bernarda, Sean Combs may be acquitted of the most serious charges here. But let's talk about the impact all of this will have on ongoing civil cases.
Yes, so you have to think, so even though he was acquitted of the most serious charge in this criminal case, when we're talking about a civil case, it's a different burden. The criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're dealing with civil cases, it's by a preponderance of the evidence, 51% versus 49%. But then again, with a civil case, he's just at risk of losing his empire in terms of money, but his liberty is no longer at stake. So he can live to fight those cases outside of jail bars.
You bring up a good point, because if he would have been found guilty of racketeering, that could have forced him to forfeit all his businesses, right?
Absolutely. So if he would have been found guilty of racketeering conspiracy and of the sex trafficking, anything that was used in order to facilitate this crime. So, for example, his mansions in Florida and his mansion in Los Angeles would have been at risk that it would have been taken away from the government, since there was evidence that was put forth having to deal with that some of the sex trafficking took place inside of those homes. So he would have been at risk of losing that, and also a lot of his businesses and his money.
In his closing argument, one of Combs' defense attorneys asked jurors to summon the courage to acquit Combs, who conceded he could be violent, jealous, and a drug user, but whose lawyers argued the case is badly exaggerated to make Combs like something he is not. Do you think that's what happened, Brian Buckmeyer?
I think, I don't know. This one I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, and I apologize. I'm trying to get information from different people as I go about this, trying to get information from people inside the court. I think, let me try to put it into words. I think when it comes to this case, this might have been more about how the case was handled than the actual people who testified. I could see how this might be an indictment on the women who testified, and I would say, as someone who watched them, I don't think it should be. I think, if anything, this is about how the case was handled by the government in terms of how they argued it, how they presented it, and the people that were selected. People even selected being the jurors, not the team themselves. And so I think as we move forward with this case and we see what's going to happen, because there is a possibility, although small, that Sean Combs walks out today, I think we just take stock of what we heard, what was argued, and what the result was, and not lay this at the feet of anyone who testified.
And now I understand, Aaron, a statement has been given on behalf of Cassie Ventura, star witness in this case. What are you learning?
Her attorney, Doug Wigdor, just sent us the following statement. This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. And Kira, we should say that's true. The criminal investigation is largely based on the statements in Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, and intensified, of course, once video from the 2016 hotel security camera became public. The statement from Doug Wigdor, her attorney, goes on to say, although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie's attorney, Doug Wigdor, goes on to say, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial. She testified for 4 days, often quite emotionally so, giving graphic, explicit detail of what she said she was made to do. And Sean Combs did not deny the facts of the freak-offs. Everything that happened in those hotel rooms did not get challenged by the defense. The defense simply saw it differently, as something that went on in a personal, consensual relationship, not sex trafficking. And that's how the outcome is reflected now, Kira.
Bernardo, I want to go on to read another part of that statement on behalf of Cassie Ventura's attorney, saying she displayed unquestionable strength and brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. This case proved that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors. Two things that stood out to me: powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that persists, and change that is long overdue. Your thoughts?
Power and money. You can buy yourself out of a conviction. Let's be honest that if Sean Combs wasn't able to get the team that he got and pay for that defense team and experts and investigators to help defend himself, that we would have had a different outcome today. But money and power, that you can still get away with crimes if you have money and power. But I have to say, I was in the courtroom for Cassie's testimony, and she was a strong, strong witness. You can tell that the courage that she had, the strength that she exhibited. I mean, when she spoke and when she would cry from time to time, when she revisited those freak-offs and when she revisited those times when Sean Combs brutally beat her, and to see her in court sitting down, showing the strength and courage that she was able to overcome this. I think one of the most strongest moments that brought people to tears is when she said at some point that she went home and she told her husband, "You can do this without me," and that she wanted to cross the street and commit suicide because of what she had been through. But I'm glad that Cassie has been able to pick herself up and has been able to move on, taking it day by day, because it does show the strength that she got as a result of coming forward. That coming forward helped to bring closure to her.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, getting more insight from Sean Combs inside that courtroom, saying this coming from journalists in the press room. He was overcome with emotion as the verdict was read. His feet were visibly shaking throughout the reading of the verdict.
He has been an emotional defendant throughout the entire case. In fact, at one point, the judge had to admonish his attorney that Combs was gesturing and trying to make eyes with jurors as if to attempt to influence them when they were hearing certain testimony. And the judge made him sit straight and silent throughout much of the testimony. But as the verdict was being read, he started gesturing. He got down on the floor after it was over to kneel in prayer. Applause broke out into the courtroom. And I'm struck, Kira, the crowd has gathered here outside. And in the windows of the upper floors, courthouse employees are peering down to look at the streetscape below as more people rush toward these doors in anticipation of a possible release on bail sometime later on today, Kira.
And as we wait to hear what the outcome of that is, of course, if indeed the judge decides he could be released today, Brian Buckmeyer, let's talk about the jury makeup here and how it influenced this case, you think. We talked about the fact that it was 8 men, 4 women. Your thoughts on the number of men in this case versus women and how you see that influencing what happened here?
Yes, I know oftentimes when we look at jurors, we look at race or gender. And yes, there's a possibility that the number of men in this case could have been beneficial to Sean Combs in terms of trying to decide what this relationship was like. But I think probably more importantly than race or gender would be age. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to the conversation as to whether or not these were consensual relationships, which appears to be at the heart of the jury's verdict in terms of saying, yes, we saw that you brought these people across state lines for prostitution, but we don't believe there was force, fraud, or coercion for trafficking, and we don't believe that there was a criminal enterprise or that there was not 2 predicate acts, right? I think a large part of the not believing comes down to consent. And what I find, at least when I talk to a jury or just talk to people in general, is there's a big divide in terms of what is consent when you talk to someone who is over the age of 40 or 45 and under the age of 40 or 45. And when you have a jury where more than half of them are 51 years to 74 years old, and even if you go even below that, there's a number of people who are in their 40s, I think the conversation and the argument that Mark Agnifilo and his team were having about what it means to consent works for people in that age demographic. I think if we had a jury that was predominantly in their 20s or early 30s, this argument of consent would be very different. So while I do see that there is value in looking at the gender or the sex of the jurors, I think the age told us a lot more based on the arguments we saw.
Bernarda, you think it was smart that Sean Combs did not take the stand?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If Sean Combs would have taken the stand, this case would have become a deliberation of whether this jury believed what Sean Combs had to say, whether his demeanor came off as one as credible. Also, you have to think where if Sean Combs were to testify, there was a lot of evidence that the prosecution was not able to get in their case in chief because they were missing a link. And that link would have been Sean Combs. So they would have been able to get that evidence in had Sean Combs testified. So it would have changed the deliberation process, and we would have probably been looking at a completely different verdict. Also got to think, how would he be able to explain in terms of the brutal beating of Cassie and of Jane on that particular occasion?
Aaron, do you think we'll hear from the family? Sean Combs' mother, Janice, was in the courtroom along with his sons, his daughters. Are they expected to speak? Do you think they will speak?
I'm not sure. They haven't yet during the course of this trial, but the cars that they've been using to transport themselves to and from the courthouse are now pulling up to the front here, and they should be walking out those golden doors any moment. They may opt to wait until they know whether Combs is going to get released on bail, as his defense attorney argued he should be. and Combs almost seemed confident that the judge would grant it. He mouthed and said aloud to members of his family in the gallery, "I'm coming home, baby," after the split verdict here, acquitting him of the most serious charges, but finding him guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And because that is not a violent crime, the defense said that he has earned the right to get released on $1 million bail, as Combs offered to put up.
Aaron, we talk about the support outside of the courthouse there, the cheers that were heard from inside the courtroom. We should point out it's because he had his mom and his kids inside that courtroom. But if you want to talk about people showing up to support Sean Combs throughout all of this, the only celebrity that we witnessed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that came to show support was Kanye West.
That's right, and what a moment that was. The family now is coming out. You can see the mother of Sean Combs waving and giving a thumbs up. His sons walking out as well. Twin daughters. You can hear perhaps the cheers from some of the supporters, if you can hear them over the hum of the traffic. There were supporters in the courtroom throughout, a few outside, but only Kanye West showed up to court. And when he walked in his all-white suit, he said he was here to support Sean Combs, but he never saw him. He was not allowed inside the courtroom itself. He watched about 10 minutes of the proceedings inside an overflow room and was in and out of the courthouse in about 20 minutes. And we're not sure whether he was invited or not, or showed up of his own volition. There really haven't been that many supporters apart from his family that just left court, as you can see, waving and giving a thumbs up moments ago. Sean Combs has been largely left alone with members of his family, including the mother of at least one of his children. His twin daughters were here at the beginning. They came at the end. His sons were here throughout the case, as was his mother. And when the jury came back stuck yesterday, Combs turned to his mother and said, "It's going to be okay." And today, after the outcome, he turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home, baby."
Bernardo, let me pull something out of what Aaron just said. Sean Combs was largely left alone through all of this. We're talking about somebody that was a huge businessman, a music mogul, a producer, a huge part of making hip hop mainstream. He threw these lavish parties. He was always pointed to at big events and galas. The fact that Aaron said he was largely left alone, what does that tell you?
And he was. I was in a courtroom for the entire trial with the exception of one day. And literally the only person who showed up was Kanye. And the jury didn't get to see Kanye because he was in an overflow room. But in terms of being left alone, Kira, are you surprised? When you look at that video, the Intercontinental video, there's no running from it. And artists and celebrities, they wanted to run away from that because they didn't want to be associated with that type of violence. So it came down to money.
Bernardo, thank you. Aaron, want to take it to you as we reach the top of the hour here. We now wait to see if indeed the judge makes a decision. He says he will make it today, if he will allow Sean Combs to be released and walk out those doors behind you.
The judge gave them several hours to make written arguments before he issues a decision on release on bail. But Sean Combs is already celebrating after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faced that could have sent him to prison for life. He was convicted of transporting people for the purposes of prostitution, but taking that as a win, even though in theory he still faces up to 20 years in prison, Kira.
And acquitted of the most serious charges. Bernardo, Brian, Aaron, thank you. We're going to return you now to your regular programming. For some of you, that is Good Morning America. But I do want to tell you about an ABC News special, Verdict, the Diddy trial, that will air tonight, 10 Eastern. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. The entire team will be here for World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Kira Phillips. Thanks for staying with us.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo, and we are following that breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, or sex trafficking. He was found guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Court has now been adjourned as the judge decides whether he will release Combs today. I want to bring in ABC's Rena Roy outside court and ABC News entertainment contributor Kelly Carter for more. Rena, talk to me about the reaction here in the courtroom, really, when this verdict came down.
Diane, this was an incredibly emotional moment. Sean Combs was visibly overcome with emotion. His feet were shaking under the table as the verdict was being read, and he then got down on the ground, kneeling in prayer when he found out that he had been acquitted on the most serious charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. He turned to his family and he said, "I'm coming home, baby." And there were loud cheers and applauses in the courtroom. We know that his family has been here to support him almost every single day of this trial. They actually just walked out of the golden doors of this federal courthouse here in Lower Manhattan just a couple of minutes ago. And there are a lot, you can't see now because there's a bus here, but there are a lot of supporters here out here for him. Of course, people who also weren't so happy about this verdict. There's a lot of bloggers that have been covering this trial since day one, as well as all the media. We have been out here for almost 2 months at this point. Court is now adjourned for the day, but things are not over because the judge still has to weigh whether or not Combs will be released as early as today. That's what his defense attorneys are asking for, but prosecutors are arguing against that. So they both have several hours. The judge wants letters back from them making their cases at around 1 o'clock, and then we will potentially hear later today whether or not he will be released, Diane.
And I want to bring in our legal contributor, Bernardo Villalona, as well here on set with me. Bernardo, he acquitted of the most serious charges, still found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each of those carries a maximum. Each of the 2 counts he was found guilty of there carries a max of 10 years. So what does the judge have to consider now, not only in terms of sentencing, but in terms of whether or not Sean Combs should be released today?
Sean Combs should be released today. He was acquitted of the most serious charges, and those also having to deal with violence. I was at his bail applications for the 3 times that he made a bail application. And the huge sticking point by the prosecution, by the government, is the violence itself, and that he was intimidating witnesses and still in contact and breaking the rules while he was in custody. Now, at this moment, those were allegations. Now a jury of his peers has spoken and has found him not guilty. So those are no longer allegations. So he should be freed. In terms of what the judge is going to consider is 1, that he was acquitted. 2, that the sentence that he is facing, there is not a mandatory minimum. So technically the judge can even sentence him to probation or to time served. 3, whether there's a risk of flight, of him not returning to face sentencing date. That is highly unlikely, especially since Sean Combs knows what the exposure is, and also that for him to flee, it would give him a bigger exposure and almost guaranteed a jail sentence if he weren't to come back. So the judge should release him today. In terms of sentencing, now that's a long process there. The first thing that's going to take place is that the judge is going to order the Department of Probation to do a probation report and a probation interview of Sean Combs and do a deep dive into his background and ultimately make a recommendation as to what the sentence is going to be. Best believe that that intercontinental video is going to come back into light when it comes to sentencing, because the judge can take into account criminal acts that he wasn't convicted of when determining a sentence, a just sentence for Sean Combs. But given that he has a lack of criminal record in terms of something serious, it's highly likely that the judge will give him something in relation as to time served, or maybe just a few more months in terms of being incarcerated, since he was found guilty of 2 counts that technically can run consecutive.
Now, the prosecution has already said they're going to be seeking a severe sentence here, or a significant sentence. What do you think that means in terms of what they're going to at least try for?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution doesn't ask for the max and asks for the sentences to be consecutive.
Just 20 years?
Yes, for 20 years, the max, because it's 10 years max as to each of these counts, and they can actually run consecutive. The prosecution is going to name out that, look, when it came to transportation to engage in prostitution, we're not talking about just 1 instance or 2 instances. During their closing arguments, they put up a photograph of 27 been men that were actually trafficked as a result of doing these freak-offs and these hotel nights. So the prosecution is going to try to seek the maximum amount of sentence and also include those acts that he was found not guilty of in terms of that Intercontinental video, and get statements from Jane and Cassie in order to try to move this judge to try to get the maximum sentence, which again is highly unlikely.
Bernardo, the defense argued throughout that all of the sexual encounters in this case were consensual. Does the fact that the jury found him not guilty of sex trafficking mean they agreed with that?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So just because a person is found not guilty doesn't mean that they necessarily said that they found that they weren't any freak-offs or that it wasn't consensual, but that there was some seed of doubt that prevented them from saying that he is guilty. When they say not guilty, it's not saying that they're proclaiming that Sean Combs is innocent. What it is that that person, Sean Combs, is being acquitted. That verdict says that the prosecution did not prove this count beyond a reasonable doubt, but not necessarily that they believe in their heart that Sean Combs didn't commit these acts and that it wasn't consensual.
And I want to bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who's been at the court throughout this whole trial. Aaron, what sticks out to you about the way this verdict came down and the discussions that these attorneys are now having as they write letters to the judge about whether or not Combs should be released?
They have several hours now, Diane, to make the case whether Sean Combs should be released on bail. Combs himself offered $1 million bail, and the judge indicated to him that he did not want to go back to MDC, the federal lockup in Brooklyn where he's been held. And that's when he clasped his hands together as if to say, that's exactly right, Judge. And so the judge said he would decide today whether to release him on bail. Prosecutors asked for a few hours to put their letter in opposing it. He does still, as prosecutors point out, face the possibility of 20 years in prison on the conviction of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And the way prosecutors see it, he's a flight risk and a potential danger. Even though they did not prove the sex trafficking or the racketeering conspiracy, prosecutors still told the judge he has a predilection to committing crimes, including violent crimes, and represents a potential danger, particularly to women. He also, we should say, Diane, faces at least 6 civil lawsuits that accuse him of acts of violence. We'll see where those shake out in the coming weeks and months, but Combs would no doubt like to try and fend those off as quickly as possible. Outside here, Diane, there is a crowd of supporters that looks like they're going to hang out to see whether he walks through those golden doors sometime this afternoon.
And I want to drill down on those civil suits with our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, also here with me on set. Brian, I think it's in the realm of 60 civil lawsuits against Sean Combs right now. How does this verdict impact those cases?
Yeah, so about 60 or 59 civil lawsuits. I believe 14 of them involve a minor. And so the impact for those cases on this is somewhat positive in some lights, actually, ironically enough, and somewhat negative. The negative, obviously, in that he was found not guilty of the RICO conspiracy and the sex trafficking. So if there's any allegations that mirror that in these civil complaints, Sean Combs is going to feel very confident that he might be able to win those. But different allegations, different alleged victims. And I think, as Bernardo pointed out as well, there's a different standard there. And it comes to a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, a much higher standard than the civil standard of preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, or 51%. But the reason why I say it could be potentially positive for those filing civil lawsuits is if Sean Combs was found guilty of that racketeering conspiracy, there would be a forfeiture application in terms of trying to dismantle that racketeering conspiracy or that criminal enterprise, where the federal government would have had their opportunity to take money out of Sean Combs before the civil lawsuits would have had their opportunity. So in a way, Sean Combs may still have enough money in his pocket that those filing civil lawsuits might be able to find a victory through that process. I compare and contrast to, for example, the R. Kelly trial, where he was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, and there was a forfeiture there, and many of the people filing civil lawsuits against R. Kelly found it difficult to win in those cases.
And I want to bring in Kelly Carter to talk about the cultural impact here, because, Kelly, it's hard to understate or overstate, I should say, the role of Sean Combs in music and culture in general. I mean, not only was he a legend in rap music, he was a legend in music in general, as a producer, as an artist, and then on to becoming a businessman with an empire. What does this mean for all that now?
I mean, I think it means a lot. The truth of the matter is that it almost didn't really matter what the outcome was of this trial. The conversation changes immediately about what his legacy is. You know, this is a person who really touched every corner of pretty much every industry, not just music, not just spirits, not just fashion, politics, pretty much every industry he touched. He really ushered the hip-hop generation into the mainstream, into commercialism, and made it the billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry that it is right now. And I think, you know, regardless of the outcome, it's going to be difficult for people to unhear some of that testimony and to certainly unsee, you know, that infamous now Intercontinental video that was released with him and Cassie from 2016. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what his life is like as a businessman moving forward, but I don't expect to see something in the immediacy. And I definitely expect us to be dissecting his legacy for a good while now.
And we do have a statement from Cassie Ventura's attorney, Douglas Wigdor. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November of 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial." The statement goes on to talk about her strength on the stand and to talk about the misconduct they say has persisted for decades without repercussion. Bernarda, I want to go to you on this point of what this means for future cases, precedent here. Does a verdict like this deter future potential witnesses in similar cases?
I think it definitely does. A verdict like this does deter victims and witnesses from coming forward. I think when you're talking about when the perpetrator is one of who has power, who has money, who had the key to the city, I think victims are looking at it, wait, if the prosecution gave it all they had and they went after him and they still didn't find him guilty, what about little old me? What about just regular perpetrator from down the block? What's going to happen in that type of case? So I think this is a huge deterrence for victims.
And Brian, I'm out of time, but I quickly want to touch on the way this case was brought has been criticized from the beginning. The actual charges they brought, the fact that it was a federal trial and so on. Walk me through that part of it. And do you think there are any legal lessons learned there?
I think there are legal lessons in terms of how to bring this case. I think for federal prosecutors, they've used the RICO statute in very creative ways. If you want to talk about R. Kelly, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, there have been people who have been in the spotlight who have bemoaned and said that this is not how the statute is meant to be. And I think this might be one of the first major setbacks in this use of the statute in this kind of new wave. And I think this is going to be, agreeing with what Bernarda said, but I'll add on to a reevaluation of how do we define RICO going forward? Who fits into a RICO? What is a criminal enterprise? And are we going to open or close off how we now progress or move forward in terms of evaluating should we use this statute for these different types of enterprises?
All right. Rena, Brian, Bernarda, Kelly, thank you all. And big thanks to Aaron Katursky, who again has been at that courthouse from the very beginning. Also, for more on today's verdict, catch the ABC News Live show Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy, streaming tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, the rough weather is complicating Republicans' race to pass President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Speaker Johnson says the House could vote on it as soon as today after the Senate narrowly passed the bill yesterday. And now the president's planning to meet with Republicans at the White House to get it done. Let's bring in ABC News Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien and ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that. Hi, Jay. So what's the latest on this potential vote?
Yeah, so we're still tracking a preliminary vote, a key procedural vote, the first hurdle for this bill as it's come back to the House. To be sometime this afternoon now. It was actually supposed to be as we speak, but that's been kicked a little bit into noon. So this is the vote on what's called the quote-unquote rule. The rule is what kicks off your ability to vote on this legislation in the first place. And what you're seeing there on the floor are members debating this rule. And forgive me as I scroll here on my phone because I just caught up up with Speaker Johnson not long ago, and I asked him, does he have the votes to get this over the goal line? Because right now, by our count, he's got at least a dozen in his party who say that they are either firm no's, or they're weighing no, or they're holdouts. And as you said, a number of them have shuttled back and forth from the Capitol here to the White House to be worked on by the White House to try to get from no to yes. Speaker Johnson said, quote, "We're working on everything," but he wasn't necessarily clear that he has the votes in his column right now. Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, also earlier today saying that this procedural vote, the one I was just mentioning, the one that's imminent, it's going to probably happen within the hour, if not next hour, is going to be their first test of if they have the votes in their column to get this bill, President Trump's signature legislative agenda, over the goal line, or if those holdout votes, either moderates who are concerned about cuts to things like Medicaid, or hardline Republican spending hawks who don't like the price tag of this bill, try to tank that procedural vote and stop the process of getting this bill over the goal line dead in its tracks, Diane.
Selena, what kind of pressure is the president putting on Republicans to pass this? And is he trying to cut any deals to make this happen?
Well, Diane, enormous pressure. And in fact, we've already seen a group of Republicans, House Republicans, enter the White House today. We know that the president is going to be speaking directly with some of them, that there are going to be multiple meetings between senior White House staff members with these Republicans. And an official tells me that the president has been heavily engaged in this from the beginning, and that there's been constant communication between the administration and House Republicans as this bill was making its way through the Senate and undergoing changes there. So, look, enormous pressure from the president, because this is the president's flagship centerpiece of legislation. And he has already threatened that anyone who opposes this bill is going to face the consequences. We have seen the president take to social media to publicly shame opposition. He's also repeatedly threatened to back primary challenges for any congressmen or women who decide to go against his bill. So the stakes here are extremely high for these members of Congress, these House Republicans. And the president really has his work cut out for him, because he's got to convince, as Jay mentioned, some of those moderate Republicans who are very concerned about those steep cuts to Medicaid. But you've also got those fiscal hawks who are not happy about how this is estimated to add trillions of dollars to the federal deficit. So these House Republicans, they've got to weigh these threats from Trump against concerns from their own constituents.
All right, Selena Wang, Jay O'Brien, thank you both. Coming up, dangerous storms are prompting thousands of flight delays and cancellations. We have the holiday forecast and what to expect if you're traveling today.
Amanda Riley was a mother, wife.
Everybody loved her.
I heard the words, "You have stage 3 blood cancer."
We gave our hearts, our prayers.
We thought she was God's gift, but she was a liar.
Why would somebody fake cancer?
There's all these pictures of her in the hospital with IVs, tubing. It was only a matter of time until Amanda's whole world came tumbling down.
Oh my God! Scamanda. All episodes now streaming on Hulu.
At any point, you can encounter evil.
Young woman riding her bike and she gets abducted.
Where is she? It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
You get the phone call. She's been found.
One of the worst pains you can ever have.
I kind of had to stop my jaw from falling.
What kind of person would do this sort of thing?
Evil person.
She Was Almost Home. The 2020 true crime event. Friday night at 9/8 Central on ABC.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, flight delays and cancellations are stacking up as storms make a mess of holiday travel. In the Northeast, heavy rain brought flooding to parts of Philadelphia. Right now, the worst of the delays are in D.C., New York, and Boston. But check out this scene in Las Vegas. That's a dust storm, making it so you could barely see the runway. Now, millions are hitting the road for what AAA predicts will be the busiest driving day this week. Let's bring in transportation reporter Sam Sweeney in Washington and ABC's Jacqueline Lee in L.A. for more. Sam, how are those delays and cancellations looking now?
Things are a lot better than they were yesterday, Diane. Right now, we are seeing just over 300 cancellations nationwide. That is considerably lower than what we were seeing yesterday when we had those storms coming in through the Northeast. Even out in Denver and Las Vegas, as you mentioned there on your screen, a dust storm stopping departures at Las Vegas, thunderstorms in Denver. But things a lot better today as the weather clears up. Still, as I said, 300 cancellations because the airlines are now working to get back on track, and we've seen some pop-up storms. But if you are flying today, you'll have a lot better luck than you did if you were flying last night.
Jacqueline, what do drivers need to know before they hit the road?
Days on the road. The traffic will be the worst in the afternoon, so families should try to leave early in the morning if they want to avoid that. But the other thing is you can try to plan ahead all you want, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that pop up unexpectedly. There's construction, there's crashes, and there's even severe weather. So that will impact how long it takes you to get to your destination. So always want to be patient, you know. Diane.
All right, good advice. Sam Sweeney, Jacqueline Lee, thank you. And of course, the weather could also have quite an impact. Meteorologist Kenton Dwecky is tracking the holiday forecast. So we're going to get cooperation or what, Kenton?
You know, we're mostly going to get cooperation, especially if you're staying over here in the Northeast. Right now, when we look at the forecast for our day today, you can see these showers and thunderstorms are heading down from Virginia all the way down to Florida. But otherwise, it's just Texas over there, actually towards the southeast or the southwest, over in the desert. They're getting some monsoonal moisture that's giving them actually a chance for flooding today for places like Tucson and Phoenix and El Paso. So watch for that. Here's your Thursday. We're still looking at some monsoonal moisture over there, but then over to the East Coast, we're starting to dry out. Florida, you're getting a lot of rain. You're going to hold on to a lot of rain for the days to come. So we're heading down there. Expect that, especially in that Miami area up to Tampa. You're going to be getting quite a bit. Now let's look at July 4th on Friday. It's a lot of rain from really the Dakotas all the way down the Great Plains, getting down towards Texas. That's where the most problem spots are going to be. But everywhere else, the West Coast, the East Coast, aside from Florida, you're going to be A-OK, but it is going to be very warm. Speaking of that rain in Florida, by the way, it's along with a 40% chance for development into a tropical storm. It's only a 40% chance in the next 7 days, so it probably won't, but we're going to be watching it. And regardless if it does or not, it's going to be very rainy. A lot of moisture is going to be around the area. So again, daily rain, a daily deluge, if you will, in Florida through the holiday weekend. And then it's just going to be hot across much of the nation, but the most above average will be in the north. 90 in Minneapolis on July 4th. And Washington, D.C., you're also going to be getting into the 90s here. 90 on Sunday. And Burlington could be near a record by Sunday, too. Diane.
All right, Kenton Dwecky, thank you. Coming up, Judgment Day for the suspect in the Idaho College murders case. What victims' families are demanding as Bryan Kohberger is expected to plead guilty.
America's #1 news, ABC News, now streaming 24/7 on Disney+. David Muir, ABC's World News Tonight, the most watched newscast in America, and honored with the Emmy Award, winner for Outstanding Live News Program. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast.
Sitting down with Barbara Walters.
I know you don't want to talk about guys, and I won't push it, but how are you going to find anybody?
No one ever got out totally unscathed.
You don't really act. You don't sing. You don't have any, forgive me, any talent.
She was fearless, and sometimes she got under people's skin.
My God.
She asked the question nobody else had asked.
She could talk to anyone about anything.
Right now, ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Walters.
ABC's David Muir, the most watched newscast in America. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, the suspect in the Idaho student murders case is set to take a plea deal today. Bryan Kohberger is expected to plead guilty to murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 with a penalty of 4 consecutive life sentences instead of a potential death sentence. Let's bring in ABC's Alex Stone in Boise for more. Alex, what's the latest there?
Hey there, Diane. Yeah, we expect in about 2 hours from now that Bryan Kohberger is going to walk into the courtroom here inside the Ada County Courthouse, and he's going to change his plea to guilty on all counts, including the 4 murder counts and 1 burglary for entering that home on King Road in Moscow. He could decide to change his mind and not go with a guilty plea, so it's not a done deal until he actually does it here. But Diane, family members of the victims, they are not happy about this. This is not what they wanted. They are angry about it. Some will be here outside of the courthouse making their voices heard, but we expect a guilty plea in a couple of hours.
Any indication here, Alex, that we'll get answers about the motive or other long-held questions about these murders?
Probably not today. If that is going to come, maybe at sentencing, he will then speak and give some explanation. The family members wanted prosecutors to make him, as part of this deal, explain the crime and explain where the murder weapon is or was. What happened to that murder weapon? And prosecutors said no, because the deal was already done, that they couldn't change that deal and make that a requirement for him to do that. So he has the ability, he has a right to speak. It's probably unlikely that he will, but he could. Likely today, it's going to be just that change to a guilty plea. He will acknowledge that he knows what that means to the court, and that'll probably be about it.
All right, Alex Stone, thank you. And be sure to catch ABC News Live anchor Kana Whitworth's ABC podcast about the case. The King Road killings is available wherever you get your podcasts. And a New Jersey man is under arrest for allegedly attacking another passenger mid-flight. According to the police report, the Frontier Airlines flight was heading from Philadelphia to Miami when the suspect approached the victim and grabbed him by the neck. ABC's Victor Oquendo has more from Miami International Airport.
An alarming scene as a fight breaks out on board a Frontier Airlines flight bound for Miami while it was still in the air. The plane was about to land when, according to police records, 21-year-old Sean Sharma was returning to his seat when he allegedly grabbed another passenger by the neck. The two trading blows, passengers trapped, witnessing the chaos.
The man sitting behind was making comments to the man in front, like negative comments the whole flight. And the man in front went to the bathroom, and when he came back, that's when things started to escalate.
Sisters Rosa and Regina Gergely seeing the scuffle firsthand.
You could hear just like pounding kind of and like people talking or yelling, and we could just see two people fighting, and it was almost like hitting the wall next to it.
Authorities saying the victim sustained superficial cuts and declined medical attention.
We've really got to do more to stop this nonsense. This should be treated as seriously as it really is, and that is disruption in the cabin that could lead to much worse things.
Sharma was treated for that cut above his left eye. He was taken into custody and charged with battery. Bond was set at $500. Diane?
Victor Oquendo, thank you. And thank you for watching. I'm Diane Macedo. The news never stops, and neither do we. We have a lot more news right after the break. Stay with
us. All across America.
Good morning. Hello.
Wherever we are.
Welcome. It's good to be home.
It feels like home.
Hi. When's the last time we dropped our things and went? Woke up somewhere that we've both never been. Growing up doesn't mean good morning. How are you?
At the start of the day, letting us into your home, putting the good in your morning.
Man, it's good to be home.
GMA. It's an invitation to come together. Brighten your morning.
I'm George. How are you?
And the day ahead.
I knew aliens were looking for me.
Disney Pixar's Elio is the best Pixar movie in years.
This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen.
This is the bathroom.
And Pixar's best original since Coco.
I am not fireproof. Just get in my mouth. It's actually kind of comfy in here. It is? I've never been in there.
It's the reason we go to the movies.
You are more puny than I expected.
I could say the same about you.
What?
Disney and Pixar's Elio. Rated PG. Now playing only in theaters.
Holy blank! Match Game is back. Join host Martin Short with celebrity guests Selena Gomez, Randall Park, Anthony Anderson, Amy Sedaris, Joel McHale, and so many more for a wild, all-new season of Match Game, starting July 23rd on ABC.
America's #1 news, ABC News, now streaming 24/7 on Disney+. David Muir, ABC's World News Tonight, the most watched newscast in America, and honored with the Emmy Award, winner for Outstanding Live News Program.
What is this place?
Hey!
Daywalker! Vampires! Chill.
The vampires and daywalkers hate each other. We come from a town where all monsters live together.
That is not gonna happen.
Fight for what you believe in.
One of our towns won't survive.
It's them or us.
When your songs have over 30 billion streams, where do you go to light up the morning? Monday, it's Louis Capaldi, live on GMA. Monday, only on Good Morning America's Summer Concert Series, sponsored by Massage Envy. Friday nights at 9 on ABC. Mean true crime.
True murder mystery.
Shocking.
Sex, betrayal, lies. A bombshell. The greatest true crime stories.
2020. Friday nights at 9.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. We are staying on top of that breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking, and guilty of 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Court has now been adjourned, and the attorneys have been given a timeline, a deadline, I should say, to submit a letter to the judge as to whether or not he should be released today and why. I want to bring in ABC's Rena Roy, who's outside the courthouse, legal contributor Bernardo Villalona, and entertainment contributor Kelly Carter for more. Rena, what's the latest?
Well, Diane, just a couple of minutes ago, supporters of Sean Diddy Combs were out here outside the courthouse chanting, "Let Puff go." Right now, that is what people are focused on right here. They are focused on the decision that we will see come from the judge's bench sometime today, whether or not we will see Sean Combs walk out of these golden doors, out of federal court after he's been held in federal custody since his arrest last year. His defense attorney is arguing for his release on bond today, but prosecutors, they want to see him held behind bars. They will be fighting for significant prison time. Combs did turn to his family after the verdict was read. He said, "I'm coming home, baby." Of course, we don't know if that is the case yet. His mom, Janice, has been here every single day of this trial, and she told our team that her heart was fluttering as this verdict was read, Diane.
Bernardo, Combs' defense attorney is arguing for him to be released today, even saying that his private plane is in Maui, that he doesn't have access to it, he's not a flight risk. The prosecution's fighting that. How do you see this going? They now have a few hours until they have to give a letter.
So the judge should release Sean Combs today because he's been acquitted of the most violent crimes in terms of the most serious crimes, and there's no mandatory minimum now. So quite honestly, this judge could sentence Sean Combs to time served or even to probation, or ultimately up to 10 or 20 years if you run the sentences consecutive. So in terms of he's no longer a flight risk, yes, because he has beat those most serious charges. Usually prosecutors say it's because a defendant is facing a mandatory minimum that they won't come back so they can face their sentencing day. But I think highly likely that the judge will release him today and set a date for sentencing, because we have to be clear, sentencing is not going to happen in the next 2 weeks or so. Sentencing will take place, I don't see it taking place any earlier than 3 months from now.
And I want to bring in ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katursky on that point. Aaron, in terms of process, how does this move forward now?
So the judge has given the attorneys a deadline an hour and a half from now, and they are going to submit letters. Then there will be a hearing in open court as the judge decides whether to release Combs. The defense argued because he was acquitted of the most serious charges, he deserves release on bail. Combs offered $1 million, offered to put up his luxury homes, and certainly the court and everybody else saw these pictures of his opulent homes in Miami and in Los Angeles that were part of the case. Prosecutors opposed it, said Combs still faces the possibility of 20 years in prison, and therefore he should be held up until the time of sentencing, because it's still possible that he's going to be hauled off to jail, and he represents a flight risk and a danger otherwise because of a predilection of to commit other crimes, according to prosecutors. Combs told his family, "I'm coming home, baby," after he was acquitted of the most serious charges. Applause broke out in the courtroom. If he does get released on bail, we're told he is going to walk through those golden doors and make a statement outside here on the sidewalk. It would be an incredible moment if someone who's been incarcerated for the better part of a year is able to win release on bail and able to talk about the outcome of this trial.
Kelly, Combs has had such a huge influence on the music industry and beyond. What did these charges do for that? And does this verdict change anything?
I mean, the charges, it's definitely a mark on his legacy, and I think it's a significant one. You know, I think it's noticeable that we're not talking about the parade of famous people and titans of industry who showed up to support him in court. So I feel like that is indicative of probably what we should expect his status to be in the business world that he left, And again, everything changed once that Cassie civil lawsuit dropped in 2023. I mean, we hadn't seen much of him since then. And certainly once he became incarcerated, we didn't see an outcrying of support from the biggest names in Hollywood and in the music industry. So I do think that this changes things significantly for someone who, quite frankly, has been a cultural icon for 3 decades.
And Rena, I read a statement a little while ago from Douglas Wigdor, Cassie Ventura's attorney, talking about how critical she was to this case, how it all started with her civil complaint and her courage and her strength throughout this trial. But I know he also spoke outside the courthouse. What is he saying about her reaction to this verdict?
Diane, there is no question that Cassie Ventura was key in this case. Doug Wigdor spoke just a short time ago outside of court here, saying that Cassie Ventura is in a good place. He says that she's happy with this outcome. They would have, of course, preferred a guilty verdict across the board, but they say that they're proud of her courage here. Take a listen.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that he still faces substantial jail time.
Now, Wigdor also said that he's proud of Cassie for shedding a light on this, saying that she has paved the way for other alleged victims to come forward. Remember, he is facing nearly 60 civil lawsuits at this point, so his legal troubles are far from over, Diane.
And Aaron, let's drill down on that a little bit. Where do those civil cases stand right now?
Well, they're all pending. There are more than 6 of them alleging all sorts of things. Some seem to be more credible than others. Some named plaintiffs, some not named plaintiffs. But Combs is going to have to reconcile with all of them. Most of them seek monetary damages primarily, and he's in a better position to fight them now, although there are some differences should any of them go to trial. The standard of proof is less in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do go to trial and Combs opts not to testify, unlike in the criminal case, in a civil case, the jury is allowed to make an inference about why a defendant would choose not to testify. So it would work a little bit differently, but the focus now, Diane, is clearly on the possibility of release on bail, to mount the defense in the civil cases, and to serve a sentence for his crimes that he was convicted of, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, which, according to statute, carry anywhere from 0 to 10 years on each count.
And Bernardo, how do you think this verdict in the criminal case could impact those roughly 60 civil trials?
So I don't think it's going to affect those civil cases. And we got to remember that when we're dealing with civil lawsuits, what's at jeopardy is money, dealing with money. It's not dealing with the liberty of Sean Combs. So he's no longer dealing with the threat that he would be incarcerated on any of those civil lawsuits. But in terms of how it's going to impact, you have to remember that this criminal prosecution dealt with 2 victims, and that was Jane and Cassie. These civil lawsuits, none of them have to deal with Cassie. None of them have to deal with Jane.
Because he settled with Cassie.
He settled with Cassie, and that is over. And there's not going to be another lawsuit having to deal with Cassie. Now, Jane, that one's up in the air. But in terms of these other alleged victims, you got to think and look at it. Why didn't the prosecution look into those victims and try to bring those victims into the criminal prosecution that, if they were actually victims, could have probably made the criminal prosecution much stronger?
And I find it interesting. The jury here found him not guilty of sex trafficking. But you say that video of the 2016 hotel attack on Cassie could still play a role in sentencing. Why?
Yes. So when it comes to sentencing, when it comes to a federal sentencing, the judge is not simply confined to the charge that the defendant was convicted of or the instances having to deal with the charge that he was convicted of. The prosecution is allowed to go into years back of what crimes or bad acts that the defendant may have engaged in and show that to the judge to be like, this person is a threat to society, and that the judge should take that into account when they're determining a just sentence to try to protect the public from this defendant. So that video, I can see that video being used in the sentencing decision of this judge.
And Rena, you could hear applause in the courtroom, even though the judge did encourage maintaining order. There were some applause in the courtroom when those not guilty verdicts were read. What else can you tell us about the reaction to this verdict overall?
Yeah, well, there were loud cheers, a lot of applause, both inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom here. Now, as we know, Combs's family was in court for this verdict reading, and his mother told us, as I mentioned, that her heart was fluttering as the verdict was read. The mother of his youngest child, her face was red. She was in tears. Combs, his feet were shaking under the table, and he actually got down on his knees in prayer after this verdict was read as well, Diane.
Aaron, what are you watching for next?
Well, the next event is going to be a hearing here this afternoon to determine whether Sean Combs should be released on bail. We also expect at some point soon there will be a sentencing date set for Sean Combs on the transportation to engage in prostitution charges that he was convicted of. There'll be a pre-sentencing report. The judge will consider the factors, as you and Bernardo discussed. And at some point, Sean Combs is going to have to be sentenced. But he seemed confident that he will be released on bail. We'll see what the judge decides, how prosecutors argue. They issued a statement a short while ago, Diane, stressing that victims of sex crimes require tremendous courage to come forward. So they are clearly mindful that the outcome could have a chilling effect on future cases.
All right, Rena Roy, Aaron Kotursky, Bernardo Villalona, Kelly Carter, thank you all. And for more on today's verdict, catch the ABC News Live show Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy, streaming tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, the rough weather is complicating Republicans' race to pass President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Speaker Johnson says the House could vote on it as soon as today after the Senate narrowly passed the bill yesterday. And now the president's planning to meet with Republicans at the White House to get it done. Let's bring in ABC News Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien and ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that. Hi, Jay. So what's the latest on this potential vote?
Yeah, so we're still tracking a preliminary vote, a key procedural vote, the first hurdle for this bill as it's come back to the House. To be sometime this afternoon now. It was actually supposed to be as we speak, but that's been kicked a little bit into noon. So this is the vote on what's called the quote-unquote rule. The rule is what kicks off your ability to vote on this legislation in the first place. And what you're seeing there on the floor are members debating this rule. And forgive me as I scroll here on my phone, because I just caught up with Speaker Johnson not long ago, and I asked him, does he have the votes to get this over the goal line? Because right now, by our count, he's got at least a dozen in his party who say that they are either firm no's, or they're weighing no, or they're holdouts. And as you said, a number of them have shuttled back and forth from the Capitol here to the White House to be worked on by the White House to try to get from no to yes. Speaker Johnson said, quote, "We're working on everything," but he wasn't necessarily clear that he has the votes in his column right now. Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, also earlier today saying that this procedural vote, the one I was just mentioning, the one that's imminent, it's going to probably happen within the hour, if not next hour, is going to be their first test of if they have the votes in their column to get this bill, President Trump's signature legislative agenda, over the goal line, or if those holdout votes, either moderates who are concerned about cuts to things like Medicaid, or hardline Republican spending hawks who don't like the price tag of this bill, try to tank that procedural vote and stop the process of getting this bill over the goal line dead in its tracks, Diane.
Selena, what kind of pressure is the president putting on Republicans to pass this? And is he trying to cut any deals to make this happen?
Well, Diane, enormous pressure. And in fact, we've already seen a group of Republicans, House Republicans, enter the White House today. We know that the president is going to be speaking directly with some of them, that there are going to be multiple meetings between senior White House staff members with these Republicans. And an official tells me that the president has been heavily engaged in this from the beginning, and that there's been constant communication between the administration and House Republicans as this bill was making its way through the Senate and undergoing changes there. So, look, enormous pressure from the president, because this is the president's flagship centerpiece of legislation. And he has already threatened that anyone who opposes this bill is going to face the consequences. We have seen the president take to social media to publicly shame opposition. He's also repeatedly threatened to back primary challenges for any congressmen or women who decide to go against his bill. So the stakes here are extremely high for these members of Congress, these House Republicans. And the president really has his work cut out for him, because he's got to convince, as Jay mentioned, some of those moderate Republicans who are very concerned about those steep cuts to Medicaid. But you've also got those fiscal hawks who are not happy about how this is estimated to add trillions of dollars to the federal deficit. So these House Republicans, they've got to weigh these threats from Trump against concerns from their own constituents.
All right, Selena Wang, Jay O'Brien, thank you both. Coming up, dangerous storms are prompting thousands of flight delays and cancellations. We'll have your holiday forecast and what to expect if you're traveling today.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions.
Operational nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it.
Not a tear in it.
How important is this label right here, Made in the USA? Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love it.
Great work. Hi.
Where are you? Where are you?
Appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Good to meet you. Ismail? David.
David!
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
I watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
Success is the... Hold on. I just had it.
Unless everything changes.
This restaurant needs to officially cease operations.
Because keeping it open would be like
Beating a dead horse before you throw it off a cliff.
We get it. I think we get it.
Showtime!
Try to keep up, yeah? Walk like a G. There you go, Neil.
It's time to party!
Monday.
And now we're in the jungle.
Ready to find some love. Let's dance, Paradise.
Paradise is back.
Good things are coming.
New beach.
Viva la Costa Rica!
New challenges. And here come the Goldens.
Oh, look, I got my inner knees done. They're reformed.
Bachelor in Paradise, season premiere, Monday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families.
On the ground in Ukraine.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, flight delays and cancellations are stacking up as storms make a mess of holiday travel. In the Northeast, heavy rain brought flooding to parts of Philadelphia. Right now, the worst of the delays are in D.C., New York, and Boston. But check out this scene in Las Vegas. That's a dust storm, making it so you could barely see the runway. Now, millions are hitting the road for what AAA predicts will be the busiest driving day this week. Let's bring in transportation reporter Sam Sweeney in Washington and ABC's Jacqueline Lee in L.A. for more. Sam, how are those delays and cancellations looking now?
Things are a lot better than they were yesterday, Diane. Right now, we are seeing just over 300 cancellations nationwide. That is considerably lower than what we were seeing yesterday when we had those storms coming in through the Northeast. Even out in Denver and Las Vegas, as you mentioned there on your screen, a dust storm stopping departures at Las Vegas, thunderstorms in Denver. But things a lot better today as the weather clears up. Still, as I said, 300 cancellations because the airlines are now working to get back on track, and we've seen some pop-up storms. But if you are flying today, you'll have a lot better luck than you did if you were flying last night.
Jacqueline, what do drivers need to know before they hit the road?
Days on the road. The traffic will be the worst in the afternoon, so families should try to leave early in the morning if they want to avoid that. But the other thing is you can try to plan ahead all you want, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that pop up unexpectedly. There's construction, there's crashes, and there's even severe weather. So that will impact how long it takes